What do you like? Tell me what you like.
There's value in that because it almost gives the brain like a vacation, right?
Holistic health is completely underappreciated, but so critical. Eating whole foods, and the key is just to find something that you really enjoy.
Welcome to the NAMP Nourishing You podcast. I'm Kristen Burkett.
And I'm Diana Wally. We're your hosts for NAMP's podcast dedicated to connecting holistic health enthusiasts with each other to share practical information from the holistic wellness space for enhanced vitality.
Diana and I are master nutrition therapists, board certified in holistic nutrition with private practices and an online joint venture that supports clients and practitioners as they strive to reach their full potential. We're honored to be hosting this podcast for NAMP and connecting our listeners with the latest in holistic wellness.
And if you enjoyed today's show, help us out by commenting below, liking this video, and subscribing to the channel to help us spread the word.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Nourishing You podcast. It's our distinct pleasure to have Dr. David Brady with us today to talk about solving nagging sleep problems. Dr. David M. Brady has over 30 years of experience as an integrative medicine practitioner and 25 years in health sciences academia. He's a licensed naturopathic medical physician in Connecticut and Vermont, is board certified in functional medicine and clinical nutrition, and a fellow of the American College of Nutrition. He is the Chief Medical Officer for Diagnostic Solutions Lab, LLC, and Designs for Health, Incorporated. He's in private practice in the integrative medicine group, Whole Body Medicine, in Fairfield, Connecticut. He's the former long-term vice president of the Division of Health Sciences and director of the Human Nutrition Institute at the University of Bridgeport in Connecticut, where he continues to serve as director and professor emeritus of nutrition. He has appeared on the plenary speaking panel of some of the largest and most prestigious conferences in the field, including IFM, ACAM, A4M, ACN, IHS, AANP, AIHM, and many more. Dr. Brady has published a multitude of peer-reviewed scientific papers and textbooks related to functional and naturopathic medicine, clinical nutrition, chronic pain, autoimmunity, and functional gastroenterology. Welcome, Dr. Brady. As practitioners who've benefited so much from the tools you oversee for us, we're grateful and truly looking forward to this opportunity talking with you today.
Hey, well, thank you. Thanks for having me on. I should have had them remove all those letters from those conferences into my bio. I'm like, oh my God.
I was going to say, Kristen obviously, is very talented with her introductions. That was a mouthful.
That was a good read, I have to say.
Yeah, she's
Most
good.
people get tripped up on emeritus. Yeah, Professor Emeritus, they say something strange. So unless they're from academia.
It's no secret, Dr. Brady, that she's the brains behind the operation. Obviously, that was very clear.
Anyway.
Yeah. So, we're so happy to have you. I love it when I can connect with a professional that I admire, but someone from my neck of the woods. So I actually grew up on the East Coast and have a brother in Connecticut. And I know you have connections to Vermont. I have a brother in Vermont. So it's such a gorgeous part of the country. So so it's good to have that connection with you.
And now I spend my winters in Florida, where I'm sitting right now. But
well, there you go. Yeah, my parents do as well. Yeah, that's a great East Coast trick.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, publicly, it seems like you're most well known for your work in fibromyalgia, but we know your expertise is much broader and you're involved with many different areas in functional medicine. So we're going to talk a lot about that. But to get us started, we'd love to hear a recap of your story and how you came into the holistic field and the different areas that you are involved in now.
Oh boy. Yeah, we have a whole hour just for that, or I started off as a musician, rock and roll musician, touring and all that kind of stuff. And then found myself into engineering, and I worked for McDonnell Douglas Aerospace. But I got on an interesting assignment using very early computer-aided design and manufacturing And one of the things that we applied this technology we were working on to was designing the first custom made and custom fitted personalized total joint replacements. As the Hospital for Special Surgery in New York City, we actually did the first viable human wrist there. So that kind of got me into the healthcare thing, from engineering into more biomechanical healthcare engineering. So I really loved that experience, and I loved like applying what I knew to the human experience and to health and helping people. So I looked to go back to school. And since at the time I was really into biomechanics and things, I actually first went to chiropractic college and got my chiropractic degree. But while I was there, I got very influenced by some mentors who were really clinical nutritionists, did a lot of botanical medicine. And I stayed and did a whole extra year of hospital rotations and did a diplomate in natural management of internal disorders. And that really opened my eyes. And right about that time, this whole thing called functional medicine was starting. And I found that, got involved in the very ground floor of that, and sort of became a little protege of Jeff Bland from the earliest days, and followed the whole functional medicine ride, and then found my way back into graduate nutrition training and botanical medicine training, and then naturopathic medicine training, and much more after that, and ended up in academic medicine for 25 years. So, and then I've always been in industry as a chief medical officer of Designs for Health for 20 years. So I've been involved in a lot of product development, product formulation, clinical trials on products, and then always had my foot a little bit in the diagnostic laboratory side. So I worked with Metametrics Labs and Genova and many others, and then was one of the founders of the Multiomics Lab Diagnostic Solutions, which is now one of the large players in the integrated functional space. So I've been doing all that stuff for 30 years. And yeah, I have a book on fibromyalgia. I've done a lot of publishing on fibromyalgia. I've seen many, many, many fibromyalgia patients, but it's really by no means, most of what I do. It's certainly a part of what I do, but really what I do is broad-based functional integrative medicine. I deal with all kinds of complex chronic disease, a lot of GI issues, a lot of endocrine stuff, a lot of thyroid, a lot of fatigue, a lot of chronic persistent fatigue, post-viral issues, whether it's chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia or long haul COVID now. So just a lot of people who have a lot of symptoms and a lot of problems and have been to a million medical specialists and they're not getting better. And we kind of do the medical detective work and try to figure out what's actually wrong with them as a unique human and give them some pathways forward to have a better existence.
Wow. I can see why we had so many letters to pronounce at the beginning of the show. You've done a lot of training.
And obviously started when you were 5. I mean,
yeah.
No,
because you look like you're about 30. So how did you do all this?
No, I'm not. I'm double that. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm just one of those people who I often, probably it's just I get bored after a while and I have to reinvent myself every 10 years, and luckily I've gotten old enough. I stopped doing that. After a while, it becomes a little bit destructive. But I remember at one point when my dad was still alive, he said to me, "Okay, boy, now that you have more letters after your name than you have in your name, you need to leave school and get a job." So I got a job at a university and stayed at, so I never really left, so, but it's been fun. It's been really fun.
I get it. I could be a professional student. They just wouldn't pay me. I'd have to pay them. So it didn't work out that way. But well, it's obvious we could go into so many different directions today. But we thought, given your experience, it would be enlightening for our audience if we went deep into sleep today. Well, maybe not literally, but through our conversation.
Let's hope we put the audience to sleep, right?
Yeah, exactly. Let's hope not. There's really some disturbing statistics around sleep issues. According to the National Institutes of Health, 1 in 3 adults in the US reported not getting enough rest or sleep every day, and nearly 40% of adults report falling asleep during the day without meaning to at least once, or at least once a month. I can't believe it's that frequent. It's also estimated that 50 to 70 million Americans have chronic ongoing sleep disorders. And we know it can lead to all types of physical and mental health issues, injuries, even a great greater likelihood of death. So can you put this into context for us? Why is sleep so important to begin with? And why do you think it's such a problem in our society?
Oh, there are a lot of reasons that I could think of, and there's probably many that I don't understand, but it is a big problem. So the statistics that you quoted there are very, daunting. But also prescriptions, sleep medications, and prescriptions to help sleep are, I think, in the top three in every industrialized country right now. So, and growth. The most rapid growing category of pharmaceutical prescriptive orders. So that just tells you what's going on right there. I think there are a lot of things that are at play. We'll probably get into some of those. I think there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of demands in the modern life. There's a lot of stuff going on with technology and screen time. And there's a lot of concern and angst. The world's a little bit of a strange place right now, and a lot of people, I think, are feeling the effects of it, and they never really allow themselves to let their guard down. I think there's a lot of dysfunctional stuff going on in personal relationships that are at play, and I think there's other things. I think there's toxic load, there's viral load, there's all kinds of things that can affect sleep and can affect the way your body deals with stress. There's just never ending ambient light going on. There's lots of sound. The world never gets quiet and dark anymore if you live anywhere in an industrialized type of country, unless you're way up in the mountains somewhere, and most people are not. So there's a multitude of reasons why people can't sleep, and it's generally not a genetic lack of melatonin, so that's not the answer for everything, right?
You just reminded me to put on my blue light blocking glasses. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I forgot last night for the podcast, and yeah, so Kristen and I are nutrition therapists, so we think food first. Talk to us about what issues with nutrition can impact sleep. Is it the quality of the food we're eating? Could it be the timing? Late night eating, those kinds of things. How does nutrition impact sleep in a negative way?
I think those things play a role. I think there's a lot of uniqueness to each individual on what kind of worked for them better as far as timing of eating. But I think you can make some generalizations that it's probably not great to eat anything like a large meal very late at night, close to proximate to the time you're going to be going to bed. That's just not the way we've kind of done things from an evolutionary standpoint. And that's another thing I didn't mention is the whole circadian rhythm being disturbed in a lot of people because of light, because of sound, because of screens, and because of work schedules, right? People on shift work and things like that. So, but when you eat becomes a very routinized thing and is one of the triggers and things that sort of set your daily rhythm and your 24-hour cycle, your circadian rhythm. And people who don't have regular schedules of eating or eat very differently on different days of the week or on the weekend versus during the week, or people who eat very late at night, or people who eat or consume stimulants later in the day or even all day long, like caffeine foods, it can be significantly problematic. But I really think where diet touches sleep the most may be sort of a one step removed, in that what you're eating as your diet and the core construct of your diet and the macronutrients that make it up has really, really strong effects on your GI microbiome composition. And we know more and more and more through the whole gut brain connection how the microbiome can absolutely have a major role in disorders like anxiety, panic attack, depression, hypervigilance, things like that. And those are things that are strongly contributory to people having insomnia. And the gut microbiome can mediate a lot of that. Different microbes in the gut can consume dietary tryptophan, and you don't make enough serotonin, or they can produce it, or they can produce serotonin, or they can metabolize it. Same thing with GABA, same thing with other neurotransmitters. So what's going on in your gut can greatly influence what's going on in your brain. And what's going on in your brain can greatly influence whether you can get to sleep, whether you can stay asleep, and maybe even most importantly, whether you're rejuvenated from sleep or not once you slept.
It's so interesting. And I want to go back because you touched on the concept of circadian rhythm. So can we go back to that for our audience and maybe just clarify what that is, why it's important? And my understanding is there is a connection between the gut microbiome and our circadian rhythm specifically. So can you kind of just maybe go into a little bit more depth on that? Because I think it's such an important concept.
Yeah, the circadian rhythm is just basically the biological 24-hour cycle rhythm that happens in mammalian physiology. And it's different in different species, right? Because there's nocturnal animals, there's daytime animals and things like that. And humans really have evolved to be daytime animals, right? We're active during the daytime. And it's many, many, many thousands of years in which, we got up when the sun came up, we got outside early and got sunlight early, we walked around, our feet touched the ground. And that's, we got up when the sun came up, we went out and we started foraging for food, or we started hunting, or we started doing what we were doing to try to get nutrition. And then once that was accomplished, you would have your break fast, right? You'd have your first meal of the day, and then you'd have some downtime, and then you'd kind of repeat the cycle. And then by the time the sun was going down, you were getting into shelter because you didn't want to be preyed upon by a predator, who are predators at night, right? And they see good at night, they hear good at night, they can do all kinds of things at night that we can't. So we don't want to be out at night, right? So we would get in a cave or get in a dwelling or some kind of shelter or whatever and hunker down. And that's when our bodies would go into more of a kind of recovery state, and a state where, the nervous system would be calm because we'd be in a safe place. And then after a certain amount of time, once the sun went down, generally we went to sleep. And so we are used to sleeping at night. We're used to being up in the day. We're used to, our biology is just imprinted epigenetically with the idea that once the sun goes down, within a reasonable amount of time, we're going to actually be going to sleep. And then when we are asleep, there's enough time of sleep for us to go through the various stages of sleep, and that we get up basically when the sun comes up again, and we get out in the sun early and we get out moving early. We don't eat immediately generally, because there was no refrigerators to go to and all of that. You had to go get some food first. So that went on for thousands of years, and it didn't really start changing until modern agriculture and the like. And we think that's a long time ago, but from an evolutionary standpoint, it's not really that long ago. And now we go forward to today, and the reality is so starkly different than that. It's hard to believe we're alive at all, but we disrupt that normal evolutionary pattern that we've always had as human beings. And we do, we're night owls. We stay up at night. We sleep in the morning. Some people, not everybody, some people are morning people. We've developed this habit of eating very early as soon as we get up. The old saying is breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Well, it's not a lot of evidence to support that statement, but it's a commonly said thing. And it's certainly not a healthy thing when the first thing you stick in your mouth is a bagel or a pastry or something that's loaded with carbohydrates and then an acidic liquid filled with caffeine. And that's the most important meal of the day. It doesn't usually really translate to good outcomes. So the whole circadian rhythm has just been massively broken. There's many barriers to it being in a good place in so many people, even people who try. Like I said, most people, it's just never dark. I remember being at the top of the Haleakala volcano in Maui in the middle of the night. And I was up there, and it was just the most eerie feeling. I just felt like I don't think I've ever felt. And then I was like, what is so strange about this thing? And I realized it was absolutely dark and there was no sound. And we're never, we used to be used to that. We're never in that anymore. we're so removed from it that when it truly is quiet. I was skiing once in Lake Tahoe, and I was on the backside of the mountain in the Nevada side, and I was by myself, and the sun was just starting to go down, and I was skiing a little late by myself, way out in the North 40 there, and probably not a great idea, but I had another one of those eerie experiences, almost like the hair stood up on my arms, and I'm like, what's so weird? And I actually stopped, and I'm like, what's going on? Then I realized I was in total absolute silence, and it was just so foreign, you know.
Yeah.
So we've
So-
talked about some of the contributors to sleep issues. So we talked about nutrition, and we didn't mention alcohol, which of course can impact sleep.
Sure.
And we talked about screens and noise and light, artificial light, and circadian rhythm. So with all of that as context, we know there are different types of sleep issues. So some people have issues falling asleep, some have issues staying asleep, some have issues with just the overall quality. Can we tease these apart in relationship to different lifestyle factors?
Not super discreetly, like with very, very defined lines.
Okay.
But a lot of crossover in those things. Some people can't get to sleep, and they struggle to get to sleep. Once they get to sleep, they sleep through until they get up. There's a lot of people who can't get to sleep, and then once they get to sleep, they wake up every couple of hours, right? And then when they wake up, they felt like they've never slept at all. So they have a triple header, right? They can't get to sleep, they can't stay asleep, and when they get up, they're totally unrefreshed they have non-restorative sleep. That's the worst, right? And then some people can get to sleep, they can stay asleep, but when they wake up, they feel like they never slept, right? They can sleep 10 hours and they're still like, they feel like they need to go to sleep again. And I haven't seen in 30 years where you can, like with like strong predictive accuracy, say, well, you live this lifestyle, this is what your sleep dysfunction is going to be. I think it is variable, but there's definitely different ways to approach treatment of those different patterns. Okay. And I think you deal with what's going on with the patient. You try to tease out what you can change about their lifestyle, what you can change about their sleep hygiene, and then you can intervene with things like nutrition, nutraceuticals, botanicals, and other kind of sleep techniques.
Okay. And so before we get into those kind of techniques, I was thinking in particular, if you had anything else that's along this line. So we know alcohol, people will say, oh, no, it doesn't affect my sleep. I fall right to sleep, no issues, but we do know it affects the quality of the sleep. So that,
Not in everybody.
Not in everybody? Okay.
Yeah. Some people, it has much more of an effect than others if you do their sleep metrics, and look at their delta wave, stage 3 and 4 sleep, and whether they can get into that sleep pattern or whether they can stay in that pattern long enough to get restoration. Because that's really the key. Like you mentioned, it's not just the amount of hours you sleep on the clock, it's do you go through all of the proper stages of sleep, and most importantly, do you get into stage 3 and 4 deep sleep or delta wave sleep, which is where your nervous system in particular, but your entire body gets to sort of really fully deeply rest and let your whole autonomic nervous system really calm down and let you go into real restorative repair mode. And that's what a lot of people, unfortunately, virtually never go in. And when they don't, they're never healthy. And I don't care how they eat, I don't care how they exercise, I don't care what they take. If they don't get deep restorative sleep, they will not be healthy.
Can you go into any detail on how that sleep cycle works? Like when in sleep is more of that deep restorative sleep versus maybe the REM sleep in terms of
Yeah,
the
it's
timing of sleep?
deeper into the night. You're getting it more toward the 50% to the back end, in the later 50%, usually of you're sleeping, but you go in and out of these cycles and sometimes multiple times through the night. And you don't even have to spend a tremendous or the majority of your sleep or anything like that in deep restorative sleep, but you need to get enough of that time for your own restoration. And there is some variability from people, person to person, on how much of that deep restorative sleep they need to feel restored and rejuvenated.
And what are some of the physical things or emotional, what are some of the consequences of not getting that deep restorative sleep? What do we see happen besides not feeling your best?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious ones would be fatigue and lack of vitality through the day, not a lot of exertional tolerance, right? But a lot of times you'll get with that sort of changes in mood. You'll get people who are, if not overtly depressed, at least they start becoming, glass half empty kind of outlook. Many of them develop some level of anxiety. And they also start developing anxiety about sleep, right, itself, which is sort of a feed forward kind of cycle. But they get blue, they get depressed, they get anxious, and they generally are fatigued. And some start developing more somatic symptoms like global pain, perception problems, and achiness. And they get into what most people would call fibromyalgia, right? It's really, and most people think of it as a muscle problem. It's not a muscle problem at all. It's a central nervous system problem, right? But it's just you perceive the one of the major symptoms as achiness in the muscles, but it's easy to then just be very reductionist about it and say, oh, you feel achiness in the muscles, the problem must be in the muscles, let's prescribe a muscle relaxer, which doesn't work, right? Unless it helps you sleep, then it might have some secondary benefit. But yeah, so they develop a lot of that, and there's definitely gender differences. I mean, the female brain, the neurotransmitter function is a bit different, particularly when it's stressed. And females tend to go on to develop those somatic symptoms like fibromyalgia. They'll tend to develop things like irritable bowel syndrome or a lot of gut issues. They'll be more prone to anxiety and panic attack. Men, when they're really stressed like that physiologically, will tend to get more easy to anger, frustrated. They'll act out physically. They're more outward in their actions as a result, neurologically, to things. I know it's stereotyping to a bit, but we see this all the time. Okay, so the female brain tends to take that stress and that experience that may get them into this pattern and turn things inward, where males tend to throw things outward. And you can argue that the females handle that in a much better, less destructive way to everyone else, but it's not necessarily healthy for them.
Yeah.
I don't know if either one of you have experienced this, but when, as a healthcare practitioner, we understand the impacts of poor sleep, that on occasion, if I do have trouble sleeping, that's all I can think about. So, it's, oh my goodness, this is not healthy, all those things, which doesn't help with sleep. So there's that.
Well, everyone's experienced that probably. If you have, here's an example. If you have an early airplane flight, right?
Yes.
Or you have something that you purposely go to bed a little early, probably because you got to get up early, but then it's in your mind, oh my God, I got to get to sleep, or am I not going to wake up on time, or whatever. And that's the night you have insomnia, the worst. You just can't sleep, right? So.
Right. Well, I'd love to get into some more strategies around, maybe supplements or things that we can add in that might help. But I'd really love to lay that foundation first, because I feel like we can't out supplement a bad lifestyle. So what are some of the lifestyle things that you think we need to have dialed in so that if we then actually need to layer on some additional support items, they have a better chance of helping us?
Yeah, well, one we mentioned already is trying to establish a predictable, consistent, and a reasonable circadian rhythm, if at all possible. And the more you can kind of respect the light-dark cycles, the better. Now, obviously when it gets, to this time of year and then the daylight savings changes and all, you're not going to go to bed as soon as the sun goes down, but you also don't want to be up until 2 or 3 in the morning, right? And you want to get up at a reasonable time once the sun comes up. But simple things. If you can and the weather's amenable to it, get outside in fresh air earlier in the morning, take a little walk, get in sunlight early in the morning before you eat, actually. if the weather's great and you're in a nice place to do it, go out on the lawn in bare feet and ground yourself, right? That's been shown to help. But those are important things. But other lifestyle things, simple. This is low hanging fruit. A lot of people have done all this, but some people haven't. Make sure where you sleep is dark, it's quiet. Invest in good window coverings and shades, particularly if there's lights outside your room, and particularly if you're a shift worker or something and have to sleep when it's light, you need to make it dark where you're sleeping for you to get to sleep and stay asleep well. You need it to be quiet. I'm not a fan of people, having to go to sleep with the television on or music on or something like that. It's just not the way we're wired. And maybe you've gotten used to that. It's habitual and it's distracting to you, but it's not good for you getting into really good, proper sleep. Don't have things that disturb your sleep in sleeping with you. That includes, 200-pound dogs, and people sleep with all kinds of crazy things, and then they wonder why they don't get good sleep when there's an animal waking them up all night. That's not going to work. Cooler temperatures can really help. So cool, dark, quiet places. I'm not a fan of the animals in bed, particularly if they're waking you up. Some people do well with sort of those weighted blanket kind of things to get that kind of a sensation on them. Those are all really important things to do. And I also tell people, listen, your bedroom is for two things. One is sleeping. You can figure out what the other one is. If you're not doing one of those two things, get out of your bedroom, right? Don't hang out in bed on your computer. Don't hang out in bed watching TV. Don't hang out in your bedroom doing other things, because it's telling your brain, your bedroom it's not telling your brain, when I go to my bed, when I'm in my bedroom, it's time to sleep. It's telling your brain it could be time for all kinds of things, including very stimulatory kind of activities, which is not great.
Yeah. What do you feel about screens and phones and that type of
I think
thing?
we're on them way, way, way too much, but I think there's a lot of things that can help. First of all, I think you should pretty much be putting the devices down and not really on them after about 8 o'clock at night. Um, and I know it's hard for people to do. These things are addictive. I'm not immune to this. I'm picking up my phone, and looking at it and doing things and checking things, and I have to tell myself, listen, put it down. It's not life and death. If there's something really going on, you'll know about it, right? And I monitor my screen time, and I have the phone report it to me and tell me if I'm doing the wrong things. But particularly if you're on them at night, you can use blue blocking lenses or glasses, or the devices themselves now have reasonably good changing the screen at night, putting the iPhone in nighttime mode. There's things on your computer that you can do the same thing, and it's a much dimmer screen, and it's pulling out some of the light frequencies that will block you from making melatonin and things like that. So all those things are helpful, but I think just getting off of the darn things by about 8 o'clock at night is a good idea.
Yeah. I think about that relative to kids a lot, kids and
Yeah.
teens, and the huge sleep issues that we're seeing in our
Yeah.
younger population and how much that might be contributing.
I got two boys, and they want to play video games at night. That's when they want to do it. So that's when they have the time to get with their friends and stuff. And it's a fine line to walk, right? Because if they don't do any of that, they're almost an outcast. That's like it's different. We met out in the street, and did things together, and went and explored, did all these things. They meet in their bedroom with headphones on, even if their friend lives down the street, right? It's just a whole different world. And I'm not convinced it's a better one, but it is what it is, right? And if you have a kid that can't do any of that, they're almost an outcast, right? So you have to strike a balance and put fences around it and parameters around it, but also, there's some concessions to just what this modern life is.
True. Well, maybe we can, now that we have a foundation, which I think is just super necessary, now we can think about what are some things that people might reach for that over the counter or with professional brands or different
Sure.
types of herbal things. What what's out there that can help with different problems related to sleep? Because I think people get very confused about when should I use melatonin? Is that if I have trouble falling asleep or staying asleep? And when should I use more of an herbal combination? And uh, can you just maybe give us some guidelines there?
Yeah, I mean, we'll start with melatonin because it's probably the thing that most people, even lay people universally at this point, know as sort of the natural sleep agent. And, it makes sense mechanistically, right? Our bodies naturally, endogenously make melatonin in order for us to get to sleep. And the melatonin production is very much keyed on light dark cycles. It's blocked in light, and it's fortified by different time persistence of darkness. And there is definitely a circadian rhythm involved in your melatonin production, and melatonin can promote sleep. And it's a downstream metabolite of serotonin, which is, another calming agent or neurotransmitter. And melatonin can be very helpful in a lot of people for them to get to sleep. It works better for people who can't get to sleep in helping them get to sleep. It doesn't work as well for the people who say, I wake up every morning at 3 a.m. or at 4 a.m. or 4 hours after I start to sleep, I wake up. Taking 3 milligrams of regular melatonin or so at bedtime is not really going to help that because the half-life of it is too short and it's pretty much gone. You can try to use sustained release melatonin, and we do make that as well. That can help in some of those situations. But if it's past about 4 hours, it's really not going to hang around that long. But melatonin can be helpful. There is a minority of patients, but enough to mention it, that don't do well with melatonin. And they tend to be the dreamers, right? It'll make them dream and remember their dreams much more vividly, and they do so almost to the point of it disrupting their sleep significantly. And some people actually report bad dreams, like almost like night terrors, kind of not pleasant dreams with melatonin. But it's probably less than 5%, but there's enough to mention it. And I've had some patients who've had paradoxical reactions to melatonin. Don't ask me how it happens. There are some people that just seem to react oppositely to everything. You give them stimulants and it calms them. You give them calming agents and it ramps them up. So there are always those folks. But melatonin is definitely something to try, particularly if you can't get to sleep. I don't generally give people melatonin in isolation a lot. I'll often give them a formulation. I made a formulation called Insomnitol. There's an encapsulated version, and then there's also a chewable sublingual version, which works really nice because it keys the nervous system with some of these sleep promoting agents, including melatonin, inositol, theanine. These are things that promote calming neurotransmitter function. Phosphatidylserine can be very, very calming to the central nervous system. But adding a little 5-hydroxytryptophan in can be very helpful as well, because that will just that's a longer lasting play. When you give 5-hydroxytryptophan, it'll give the body the precursor to make more serotonin through the night. And then therefore it can promote production of melatonin and just more of a serotonergic effect. In some people, if you add in a little bit of GABA, like fermented GABA, like pharma GABA, we have that in chews, or it's in the Insomnitol capsules. A little bit of GABA on top of those things can also be very helpful. Some people respond great to botanicals, particularly the GABAergic, the GABA receptor agonist botanicals. So things that people would know would be like valerian root, passion flower, kava. Some people can use melissa. So botanicals like that can be helpful. And I'll play around with different combinations of those things in different people to see what works best for them. For those people who can't seem to get deep sleep, and I'm a big advocate of people wearing an Oura ring or something, or some kind of wearable, at least enough to track what goes on with them with sleep. Okay, some people say, I don't want to wear any device on me. I don't want any electronics around it. I get that, but there's no way you're going to really know unless you wear something like that what's really going on in someone through their sleep cycle. So if you look at those parameters and see they're not getting into deep sleep, or they're not getting enough time with that, The GABA is very helpful, the sustained release melatonin, the 5-HTP, but usually we also add a couple of grams of glycine powder at night before they go to bed. Glycine can really get them into deeper sleep. Now, that being said, none of these things are perfect and universally have perfect outcomes, right? It's different in different people. Some people, none of these things will work, and they're even resistant to sleep meds. They take Ambien or something like that, which is really light sleep, by the way. That class of medications will put someone to sleep for about a 4 hour unless they use the sustained release, but often they wake up, they sleep when they're on them, they can't sleep when they're not on them, but when they sleep on them, they wake up and they still feel unrefreshed or unrestored, because it doesn't put you into deep stage 3, 4 sleep very well. So it's lighter, superficial sleep. Some people sleepwalk on them and do all kinds of stuff on them. Some people, the only way they get any kind of sleep that seems to restore them, sometimes they're using benzodiazepines, which are not great. So lorazepam and things such as that. Some people use trazodone. I mean, there's all kinds of things people are using to try to sleep, because some people just are really refractive to anything you're doing from a biochemical standpoint like this with just sleep agents. And those people tend to be people that have a lot of anxiety. They tend to have panic attack, and they tend to be in some level of hypervigilance. So they're in a constant, almost fight or flight, sympathetic dominant state. And often these are the kind of folks that have, and much more common in females, the female brain tends to go into this kind of feed forward, locked loop, hypervigilant thing more. It's the pattern we see in post-traumatic stress disorder on the extreme side. But you see it more in females for some reason. It's not fully understood why, but it's definitely observed. And in those people, it's way more complicated than giving them melatonin or giving them some calming, GABAergic botanicals. You really need to go back and figure out a lot of things about why they're stuck in that loop. And a lot of times you go back and you find out they had horrific childhoods, or very, very difficult early life experiences where they didn't feel safe, or they didn't feel loved, they felt abandoned. There was something going on in their background. Often when you do their history, they're children of families that they experienced very, acrimonious divorces in their parents when they were young, alcoholic, substance abusing parents, a verbal abusing, screaming, yelling alcoholic father, to young girls is really an express ticket to this. Moving a lot, other traumatic experiences, and it could be verbal, it could be emotional abuse, it could be just neglect. Probably the strongest trigger for it is sexual abuse, particularly sexual abuse within the family unit. Can really devastate someone's nervous system and imprint it with a hypervigilant, sympathetic dominant, never let your guard down type of functionality of your stress response for a lifetime. So then that involves having to, get into brain retraining, and we use functional EEGs. We'll have them seek, mental health professionals or counselors or psychologists or people that really understand post-traumatic stress disorder, really understand this long-term imprinting of hypervigilance. Because there's nuances on how to deal with different people who've had those different experiences. Just going back and talking about them and reliving them is not necessarily the best thing to do with a lot of these people. Some people, yes, and you need a professional kind of knows how to do that. And there's various techniques that they can use to kind of reframe things for people and get their brain into a different place. There's even some really good online things that people can do now if they don't want to go into like one-on-one counseling and things. There's a psychologist who's got a very good nutritional functional medicine understanding as well in the UK, named Alex Howard, and he has a great program called the Alex Howard Brain Reset Program, I think it is. He has a lot of post-trauma kind of brain retraining courses to try to get your brain out of this hypervigilant state. That's the biggest reason I see in practice for really bad recalcitrant sleep disorders, that they just can't sleep. And post-viral stuff, long haul COVID, people can't sleep. A lot of them. It's really, really hard. So, and that's different. It's rather than the trauma upregulating their nervous system when they're young and have a very neuroplastic nervous system, and they're learning how to deal with their environment. They learn they can never let their guard down. They have to be on guard. So going into stage 3 or 4 sleep is very vulnerable to the body. You're defenseless, right? The nervous system understands that, right? Innately. When you're in stage 3 or 4 sleep, if you're not trusting of your environment, you're a sitting duck, basically, right? So most of us who are not in that sort of fight or flight, always on guard kind of mode, we can get into stage 3 or 4 sleep. The people in that persistent hypervigilance, almost post-traumatic stress disorder physiology persistently, they don't want to go into stage 3 or 4 sleep in their brain because they think they're going to get attacked, right? And they're not safe fundamentally. And melatonin doesn't fix that, It's deeper, it's imprinted. But a thing that can throw people into that is viral infections. That's why, you see these post-viral syndromes like chronic fatigue syndrome, ME, right? It's post-viral for the most part. Even classic fibromyalgia is generally now understood to be a post-viral, pathogen-driven phenomena, and certainly long-haul COVID. Now, what's causing that? Well, how is the virus or the initial pathogen insult resulting in those kind of things? Because it resulted in a fundamental shift of the person's immune response and a bias toward inflammatory cytokines and all kinds of micro-inflammatory events going on deep in deep tissues, including in the microglia of the brain and deep in brain centers. So it's almost like their HPA axis and stress response is in a frenetic, hyperactive state all the time, right? Just like inflamed glands, like an autoimmunity of the thyroid, like a Graves or a Hashimoto's, it inflames the gland overproduces, right? Same thing goes on in brain function with neurotransmitters. So it can actually induce a deep brain microglial inflammatory upregulation of the HPA axis, and they get in hypervigilance. It's a bear of a problem to treat.
Well, is there hope in those situations? Are you finding success in working with people that way?
Yeah, what we do when that's in play, if it's a trauma history and all that kind of stuff going on, we get them to the right resources to kind of deal with that. A good counselor, mental health professional. I have a good functional EEG person to do brain mapping and brain retraining, or we'll have them do something like this brain reset program and so forth. And then we'll kind of deal with them at a metabolic biochemical level. And we'll do some really fairly extensive omics testing on them. And we'll do some genomic testing and look at what their SNPs look like in different key areas on COMT and methylation, things like that. But we really look at metabolomics pretty keenly. And we're trying to figure out what is their unique sort of pattern of these various key neurotransmitters and catecholamine. So what we can do with just an organic acid like metabolomics panel, I use the Designs for Health metabolomics spotlight because that's sort of self-interpretive, or the Diagnostic Solutions Lab omics tests. But some of these markers are on other organic acid tests. But you can look at key catecholamine markers like vanilmandylate or vanilmandyleic acid, or VMA for short. That's the metabolite downstream that comes out in the urine as you turn over epinephrine and norepinephrine. These are catecholamines, or adrenaline. That's the fight or flight. That's the rocket juice that these people are on, it tends to be high, right? Because they're producing a lot of adrenal medullary products and catecholamines, and the metabolite ends up in the urine. We'll look at HVA or homovinylate for dopamine. We'll look at GABA directly. We'll look at 5-hydroxyindolic acetic acid, or 5-HIAA. That's the downstream serotonin metabolite. We'll look at cortisol. We'll look at quinolinic acid, these excitatory kind of compounds that key up the brain. And based on what we see in those different things, we'll use different interventions to try to normalize those things. So sometimes we're working along the serotonergic axis, and that might mean 5-hydroxytryptophan, right, as a precursor to more serotonin. If there's high serotonin turnover, you need to be able to replete that. Or if it's very, very low. If they are screaming catecholamines, they need things that will relax their central nervous system and calm down the catecholamine output. And that can be calming adaptogenic botanicals. They're very good at that. Things like ashwagandha, right, which is the common Ayurvedic term for Withania somnifera, somnolence, right, helps sleep. And it's sedating, but not hypnotic. Like, it doesn't knock you out, but it's an adaptogenic herb that is calming. Most adaptogens have a stimulatory bias. So rhodiola, Chinese ginseng, or Korean ginseng, Panax ginseng, right? Glycyrrhiza glabra, licorice, eleuthero. Those are good adaptogens, but they're stimulating adaptogens. You give those kind of adaptogens when someone may be fatigued and they have, old classic adrenal burnout, as they would call it, but they have low catecholamines, they have low cortisol. If you take someone who's in this opposite hypervigilant state, they also have stress, HPA abnormalities, but it's different. It's not low cortisol, low catecholamines. It's often low cortisol. Sometimes it's high cortisol if it's earlier in the arc of their history, but they have high catecholamines. That's the post-traumatic stress hypervigilance people. If those folks go down to GNC and tell the clerk, oh, I have stress problems, my adrenal glands are shot, what should I take? They're going to probably give them like their adrenal formula 101 or whatever, right? It's probably going to have stimulating adaptogens. It's going to have tyrosine that makes more catecholamines. It's going to have a bunch of stimulatory stuff in it. They take it, it throws them over the edge. Now they're in full-blown panic attacks, right? So they need calming things. Some of those calming GABAergic herbs, like we mentioned, valerian, passiflora, kava, they can be helpful. I like ashwagandha. I like German chamomile. We use also things like theanine, phosphatidylserine, and inositol. We'll use some GABA. So there's a lot of things you can use to just kind of calm down those central nervous system pathways. But they have to do the other work too. They have to deal with the other reasons why their brain is upregulated. And you have to know the right way to go with it, right? Which need serotonin precursors, which don't. Which need more calming central nervous system agents that pull down catecholamines, which people need their catecholamines repleted, right? That need tyrosine, that need, Chinese ginseng or rhodiola or eleuthero, because they need to be lifted up. Some of those people that are really bottomed out on that side of the dysfunction, even sometimes we'll use a little Cortef or a little adrenal hormone just for a while to get the lights back on, right? So there's a lot of nuances to it. And if you don't do any of the kind of testing and you don't lean on things like omics, like metabolomics or organic acids, or like genomics, or in some cases even looking at microbiome patterns, we'll do GI maps and we'll see overgrowth, inflammatory based overgrowth. So we'll see overgrowth of a lot of inflammatory opportunistic organisms, which can very much light up this cold gut brain axis and vagal nerve stimulation and do all kinds of things like that. And if there's just general imbalance and dysbiosis present, it's going to be hard to maintain a good balance of and recycling of your neurotransmitters and a good balanced state of your central nervous system and your internal nervous system in the gut. So they usually have anxiety, panic, sleep disorders, unrefreshed sleep, and all of that from the central nervous system side. And then they have IBS from the enteric nervous system side, right? So they're just a continuum. Just those things touch each other. So often when you kind of get a handle over one, you get a handle over the other, and you can kind of push the person back to a better state. But sometimes it takes a while. You know, if they're 30 years in to hypervigilance, in their 50s, and they had a horrible childhood, put them into this pattern, they don't get better overnight.
Yeah, and clearly sleep issues are multifactorial, as you said, and take patience. And for the listener, in case you missed it, see somebody like Dr. Brady. Don't Dr. Google yourself out of sleep issues, because you could cause more problems than you solve.
Yeah. You know, there's nothing wrong with people, I think, trying some of the normal, you know, trying some melatonin or trying something like that. But if it's not working, don't give up and lose hope that there's no pathway to it getting it better. And if you take anything that makes it worse, listen to your body, you know, and then find someone who can parse through all this stuff and get a more personalized precision approach to it. Because, you know, odds are if someone has terrible sleep problems and insomnia and unrefreshed sleep, they have other things going on when they're awake. Their problems aren't only sleep problems, right? And so there's even more motivation than just sleep. That's motivation enough to try to address these things and get your whole neurotransmitter and your nervous system kind of in better balance and working better.
Yeah, that's well
And
said.
as you guys know, you know, a good diet, it starts with a good diet too. If you're putting garbage in, you're going to get garbage out, no matter what you're trying to fix. So, you know, we can use all these fancy nutraceuticals and supplements and things like that, but, you know, you can't pill your way out of a junky diet and a terrible lifestyle.
That's well said. Yeah. So speaking of lifestyle, we like to wrap things up by asking our guests about how they might incorporate things that they teach into their own life. So we'd love to hear from you, your secret sauce for getting a good night's sleep. And I'll share mine real quick, and to make sure it's Dr. Brady approved. But I love doing a sunrise walk with my dog every day. We try to eat an early dinner. I wear my blue light blockers, especially in the winter when it gets dark earlier. And I do love wearing an eye mask to bed just to make sure it's extra dark. And I also use mouth tape. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but that really helps me being as a mouth breather. So we'd love to hear what your secret sauce is.
Yeah, many of those things. I like to, and it's a great part of living in Florida now in the winter. I can get out every morning and just walk, you know, and it's usually sunny, you know, unlike in the Northeast where most of the winter it's gray, and, you know, so getting out early it's still helpful to get out in nature, but you don't usually have the sun. You know, here we have the sun, you get out and walk a little bit. You know, we tend to eat early. I'm eating late tonight because of your call.
Yeah.
I usually eat early.
We'll let you go soon.
Yeah. Yeah, now that we live in Florida, it's almost like a Seinfeld episode, you know, like, oh, Mrs. Seinfeld, I can't eat at 4 o'clock in the morning or 4 in the afternoon because it's on special. But we don't eat that early yet, but we do tend to eat early. We don't really drink very much at all. As we've gotten older, we just don't tolerate it as well. It just doesn't work as well for sleep. Go to sleep very consistently, you know, at a decent time. So I'm usually in bed by 10:30 latest, 10 many times. And then, you know, get up pretty much every morning at about 7, same time, weekends, weekdays, whatever. It really doesn't vary that much. Keep the room very dark, very cold. My wife sleeps with one of those weighted blankets a lot. They feel good to me when I first put them on, but then I don't know, I start feeling like I'm, you know, in a cocoon or something like that. I don't wear the masks because I'm a flipper. I flip all over, but I think they can be really helpful to some people. I do wear them sometimes on an airplane when I'm trying to sleep. I don't routinely take melatonin or anything like that because I don't have to. Luckily, I can get to sleep. I do use it when I travel, you know, through time zones. I just went to Dubai and was, you know, spoke at a couple of medical conferences there, and that was like I was a 17-hour flight and all that stuff. So that was something where I had to use all of these things I was telling you about. But I've learned a lot of these hacks and tricks, not only with patients, but my wife is my hardest case ever with sleeping, believe it or not. She's really a hard case. And once she got COVID and got long haul COVID, it got worse. So it's trying to get her to sleep has been a graduate degree for me in how to treat sleep. And we've had some success, but it's hard. She's one of the hardest ones I've ever had to deal with. So it always works that way, right? When if the mayor of your town's spouse comes in and this is the one you got to get right. They're always the hardest case, right? Or whatever. So.
Well, she's lucky to have you.
Yeah.
For sure.
No, I'm lucky to have her, but don't tell her.
Well, I envy your warm, sunny mornings. Here in Colorado, we have to have the saying, there's no bad weather, there's just bad clothes. So we
Exactly.
got to figure our way out every morning. I think Diana and I have finally figured that out over the years.
I have good friends in Colorado, in the Denver Boulder area, and I can't figure it out because one day it's 70, the next day it's like 50, and then later 70 again. So I guess it's everything. Yeah.
The answer is layers, I'm pretty sure.
That's right.
But, well, we've covered some really tangible information here. I know our listeners are going to appreciate it very much. I know it's taken me quite a bit